are going to be converting fractions to decimals. And in class, we learned about a special kind of fraction called a decimal fraction, which is a fraction whose denominator is a power of 10. So that would be 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, etc. So you may recognize those numbers as also our place value in our decimal system. So we have tenths, 100ths, 1,000ths, 10,000ths, etc. So as long as you understand place value, you can easily convert this type of fraction to a decimal. So some of the problems on your sprint will look like this, and these will probably be the easiest ones because they're already written as decimal fractions, which can easily be written in decimal notation. For example, 6 1,000ths would be written as 0.006 because this first decimal place is your tenths, and the next one is your hundredths, and then this one is your thousandths. And a good rule here for converting decimal fractions to decimals is that your number of zeros in your denominator are going to equal your number of decimal places in your decimal number. So here we have 3 zeros and you're going to have 3 decimal places. So that will always work. For example, this next one, 61 10,000ths. So I have here 1, 2, 3, 4 zeros. So I'm going to have 4 decimal places when I convert it to a decimal. So I'm going to have 0.0061. I'm going to have 4 decimal places. So 61 10,000ths is written as 0.0061 because this is tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths. Okay, so here are some other examples. 1/10 should be pretty easy. That's just 0.1 because that first decimal place is the tenths. 82 100ths. So now we're going to write that as 0.82 because here we have tenths and 100ths. And we could use our little rule here as well. The number of zeros, we have 2 zeros, so we should have 2 decimal places. 7 100ths, so again we have 2 zeros. We're going to need 2 decimal places, and it's going to look like 0.07. So that is the first type of problem you'll see on this sprint, where it's already set up for you in decimal as a decimal fraction that can easily be written as in decimal notation as long as you understand place value. So another type of problem you will see on this sprint be this kind, where it's a fraction that can easily be rewritten so that it has a denominator that is a power of 10. So it can be rewritten as a decimal fraction, but you need to use equivalent fractions here. For example, 1/2. Well, we can change this to tenths because 2 times 5 is 10 and 1 times 5 is 5. So we're using equivalent fractions. We're multiplying denominator and numerator by 5 to get an equivalent fraction where the denominator is a power of 10. Now we can easily use decimal notation to convert that to a decimal. So let's do another one, 1/4. So we can't easily convert that to tenths, but we could convert it to 100ths because 4 times 25 is 100. 1 times 25 is 100. So we have 25 100ths, which is easily written in decimal notation, 0.25. Here's one, 32 50ths. In this one, we could either make it tenths or 100ths. For example, if we made it, no, we can't actually in this one. This one, we're going to have to go up to 100ths. So we do 50 times 2 is 100. 32 times 2 is 64 hundredths. written as 0.64. This is the one where we could either go down to tenths or up to 100ths, and you would get the same answer either way, and I'll illustrate that. So if we go down to tenths, we are going to divide our numerator and denominator by 5. So we divide 50 by 5 and get 10, divide 35 by 5 and get 7. 7 tenths is 0.7. Or we could have gone up to 100, which is also a power of 10, so easily rewritten in decimal format. So here we would say 50 times 2 is 100, and 35 times 2 is 70. 70 100ths would be 0.70, which is the same as 0.7, because 70 100ths is the same as 7 tenths. It's just a simplified format. We don't need this extra 0. Okay, and this one, 7 25ths. We might recognize that 25 is a factor of 100, so we could do 25 times 4 is 100, 7 times 4 is 28, and we can write that as 0.28. So that's the second type of problem you'll see in this sprint, where it doesn't have a power of 10 in the denominator, but you can easily think about it in your head as an equivalent fraction with a power of 10. And then there is a third type of question on this sprint. And these are fractions that cannot easily be rewritten as decimal fractions. That is, fractions with a denominator of a power of 10. So ones like 1/3. So when you can't easily write that as an equivalent fraction with the power of 10 or tenths, hundredths. 3 doesn't go into any of those numbers. So what you want to do in that case is you want to divide. You just take the numerator divided by the denominator, and you can always get your decimal answer by dividing numerator by denominator. Now in the sprint, you're not going to be doing long division. I'm just illustrating this. So 1 divided by 3 is going to be, what we're going to get is a repeating decimal. We're going to get a number that's 0.333333333, and so on forever and ever and ever. The way we write that is 0.33 repeating. So this bar over the 3 means it repeats. You can also just write it as 0.3 repeating. It's the same thing. So on your sprint, you will have to convert 1/3 to a fraction. And I just want you to round it to the hundredths, which would just be 0.33. So this is one you just need to memorize. You just need to know that 1/3 is 0.33. So this one you do need to know for your sprint. You just know that you can get your answer by dividing numerator by denominator, but also memorize 1/3. That's a fraction you should just know as a decimal. Here's another one that you will see on your sprint, 1/8. So again, we can always convert a fraction to a decimal by dividing the numerator by the denominator. So 1 divided by 8. We need to use our decimal long division here. So 8 goes into 10, 1. And we get 2. And then we get 5. And then it ends. So this one does not repeat. It actually ends. And that is called, just so you know, a terminating decimal, where this one was called a repeating decimal. So 1 divided by 8, or 1/8, is 0.125. This is also something I want you to memorize. I want you to know that fraction. 1/8 is 0.125. Just know it. It'll be useful for you. So on your sprint, I don't want you to be dividing 1 by 8. I want you to memorize that it's 0.125. Okay, and so we have this 1/3 and 1/8. We couldn't easily rewrite them as decimal fractions, so we used long division, and one of them turned out to be repeating, one turned out to be terminating. So this meant, this terminating one means it actually could have been rewritten as a decimal fraction. It would be 0.125 is really 125 thousandths, because this is tenths, hundreds, thousands. So you may know that 8 times 125 is 1,000. So you could have actually used equivalent fractions, but it's not very apparent. That's why I used long division for you there. Okay, so in summary here, any fraction you have, when you convert it to a decimal, will be either repeating or terminating. So anything that's a terminating decimal actually could be written as a decimal fraction where that denominator is a power of 10. Okay, just one more thing here to cover. Just gonna go over a few of these decimals you just kind of want to have memorized, or fractions to decimal. You want to have memorized that 1/2, that's 0.5, because that's just 5/10. You want to have memorized that 1/3, which is just that 0.3 with the 3 repeating, 0.33 if you round it to the hundredths place. So then also, likewise, 2/3. I want you to know that if 1/3 is 0.3 with the 3 repeating, then 2/3 is 0.6 with the 6 repeating. It's just double it. 1/4, you should just know. 0.25. Think of money. 1/4 of a dollar is 25 cents. Likewise, 3/4. 3/4 of a dollar. That's just going to be 3 times the 0.25. 0.75. 75 cents, if you're thinking money. Let's see here. 1/5. You should know that. Think equivalent fractions if you need to. That's 2/10, so 0.2. And then if you know 1/5, you should know 2/5. That'll be just double 0.2 or 0.4. And you should know 3/5. That would be triple 0.2 or 0.6. And you should know 4/5, which would be 0.8. So those you should all you should memorize, and as well as 1/8, which I'm asking you to memorize, 0.125. So these are ones that you just kind of want to memorize. Once you have those memorized, they will be very helpful to you. So as you're going through the sprint, there will be 3 types of problems. There will be fractions that are easily converted to decimals because they are already decimal fractions. That means they already have denominators of a power of 10. So those, just use your knowledge of decimal place value. Then there'll be fractions that you just have to use equivalent fractions to rethink of them as fractions with powers of 10 in the denominator. And then finally there'll be ones like 1/3 or 1/8 that I'm asking you to just memorize. 1/3 is 0.33, 1/8 is 0.125, which you could always find those by doing long division, but on a sprint you don't have time for long division. So those I want you to have committed to memory just because they are useful for you as you go through math. So there you go. Good luck with this sprint.